So before we get demonetized for that intro for the James Bond reference and the fake blood, because that's YouTube now, we're going to talk about the Modmat and its thermal tolerance. This is something a lot of you have asked about. I have not tested it yet, so I'm going to be testing it more or less live, except not on camera while you guys are watching, and we're going to see what it can stand up to. A lot of people have asked how it would hold up against soldering and how it would hold up against a heat gun, like for hardline tube bending and stuff like that. So we have a digital heat gun here that I just picked up, and TR Industrial. I can set the output, bought it myself, and we're also going to use it for water cooling stuff later, hopefully. So we can set the output on that. We've got a soldering iron, test both of them against the mat and see how it does. Currently, the only thermal numbers I have from the factory is they basically said conservatively keep it below 60 degrees Celsius, which that shouldn't be a problem. We're going to see if we can go over that though, because that's where it should get interesting. Right now we've not recommended using the Modmat as a soldering surface. It's not a soldering mat. It's made of rubber and ink for the most part, so those things both melt. It's just a question of at what temperature do they melt. And also, we want to know how well it holds up to a heat gun, which is more relevant to a lot of our audience. Either way, if you're not familiar with the Modmat, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net and back order it. It's more or less an order at this point because we're getting them in this weekend at the time of filming this video. So they'll be shipping out basically immediately, and then factor in shipping time to get to you. It's an anti-static building surface, so great for PC modding. We've done a lot of water cooling on it with leakage, and it's held up very well to that. So fairly water resistant. Now we just need to see how heat resistant it is and if we can make some things melt or catch on fire today. I think let's start with setting up the surface. So my plan here, I'm gonna stick some thermocouples on it. We're gonna treat this like a normal benchmark, and it should be reasonably scientific, but not too crazy with it. What we're gonna do is stick a thermocouple on the surface somewhere, and then we're going to stick one on the underside of the mat. And then I have a blue mat, the old blue mat, if anyone remembers that, under here. So these blue ones, by the way, we bought these for business use, and they're $100 each. Anyway, we're going to use this to protect the table underneath the Modmat that may be up for melting today. And I'm just going to stick one of these down with some Captain tape, which is basically a thermal tape. So we're going to have one K-type thermocouple on the top and one on the bottom. K-types are plus or minus 2.2 degrees. We've calibrated these, but it's typically plus or minus 2.2 degrees tolerance. Now, that said, just to clarify something here, a lot of people hear 2.2 and they think, wow, that's a lot. It's actually not, because it's perfectly inaccurate. So if it's 2.2 degrees off, it is always 2.2 degrees off in the same direction. So let's say we have a known true temperature of 100 degrees Celsius hitting this thing, and let's say that this has an inaccuracy of 1 degree negative. So it reads 99. When we go up to 200, it'll read 199. When we go up to 300, I mean, these can't really tolerate too much heat, but basically it's always 1 degree negative offset, so it's perfectly inaccurate, which means calibration just requires that you know what the accuracy is, and then you adjust for that manually in spreadsheets or whatever. And I'm going to put one basically on the opposite side of this one. So we plug in the K-types to the thermocouple reader, figure out the temperature of the material in between by doing that. So somewhat scientific approach to this. And then this one will have an ambient temperature probe and a manual thermometer, which is also a K-type setup. But I can take this thermometer, and the plan is touch it to the end of the soldering iron so that we can figure out what's the temperature of the soldering iron versus what's the temperature of the mat, of ambient, and all that stuff. Okay, so we're all set up to go. Not sure how well the Captain tape will hold up to actual hot air blowing on it. Normally it's just kind of conductive heat it's dealing with from components. But we'll try it out. And this is somewhat controllable. So we're going to try and set it to, I don't know, roughly 60 degrees Celsius for a starting temperature. Then we'll go up rapidly from there. Just because 60 is what the factory's told me is good. I would like it to be higher than that, obviously. So we'll see how well it does. So we're going to be, this is basically, anyone remember the 1,000-degree knife? That wasn't actually 1,000 degrees. This can go up to, I think, actually 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't exactly count. So maybe in the thumbnail we can do 1,000-degree heat gun versus mat. Except not, because that's I can't bring myself to do that. So we're going for 160 is what we're gonna set for Fahrenheit, because this doesn't do, well, I mean, it might do Celsius, but I don't know how to do that. So, gotta not point it at myself while you're reading it, which is about 60 degrees Celsius. And let's just, it'll take a minute to kind of heat up, but that's the end of this. I think it is. And it's probably not too hot yet. So it is, if you look at the right thermocouple reader in the bottom left of the screen, it says 62.2, and that's the thermometer I'm holding in my hand. So we're pushing 60 C out of the end. The Modmat is still at about 53, which will give it a bit more time to heat up, but it's definitely pretty resistant to heat. I mean, it's a really high-end rubber. Like, it's an industrial material we chose. That's why the mat is such high quality, but it'll take a little bit longer. Let's see if it gets to 60 eventually. We're not melting or anything yet. I'm gonna bring it up in speed. All right, so that's enough, I think, for 60. Let's bring it up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly 90-something Celsius, maybe 93, 96. And we're gonna test two things. One is, when does the rubber melt, and when does the paint melt, which I'll do this test separately. I'm gonna have to point the gun at something painted separately for that. Also, for anyone worried about how this tape's affecting it, we're hitting the surrounding area as well. So the thermocouple is really just to tell us what the temperature is nearby, and all the tape's doing is blocking some of the air, sure, but clearly it's still heating up to 60 plus, and then we've got the underside thermocouple to validate for us, which is at 50. So we got a delta of about 10 degrees. If the bottom is 50, it's pretty safe to assume, obviously, the entire way through for this vertical slice, it's going to be 50 degrees plus, and 60 on the surface, because the thermocouple's reading on the surface. All right, so we've had the mat over 60 for several minutes now, and we've gotten it up to a peak of about 70. So let's kind of inspect if any damage has been done in the general area. Oh, there's your tape residue. That's to be expected. No damage. Let's see if I can dig any rubber out. No. No, it's fine. Cool. Okay, well, that's a good start. All right, so we're set to 115 degrees Celsius right now. Let's see if there's any difference in damage without the tape on there. All right, so that's 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes at 100 degrees Celsius for the top, and I don't know, roughly 80 for the bottom. It's pretty uncomfortably hot. Any damage? So, man, that is super resilient. I mean, the neighboring paint isn't as warm, but let's look at the underside as well. You can definitely see where we had the piece of tape and dried up all of the stickiness in the tape. All the moisture in the tape is dry. Wow, that underside is still really warm. So really happy with that so far. The mat thus far hasn't had any issues with 80 to 82 degrees Celsius for the mat temperature as measured after a few minutes of the heat gun. We're only spot checking a few things here, and we haven't tested in excess of 10 minutes or anything like that. But to be fair, you shouldn't really be pointing a heat gun directly at the mat at a painted area without anything in between them for that long anyway. So also, quick note here, the temperature of the mat is different than what's coming out of the heat gun. So when we say 80 to 82 degrees mat temperature, that's different from the air temperature. The air temperature as it's hitting the mat is over 100 degrees, but the mat temperature itself obviously is a bit different because it's a different surface. There's thermal resistance to take note of and conductivity. And then also the air coming directly out of the heat gun is quite a bit warmer than the air hitting the mat as well. Because it's further away, you lose some of that as you get closer to the mat. So what we need to do is see how the paint holds up. Maybe let's blast one of these pinouts over here. So these are our power pinouts, like if you wanted to see where the 12 volt lines are, so you could maybe do a resistance check for 12 volt versus a shunt resistor or something. So if these start bleeding color, obviously it'll be really it'll be really apparent to us. So we're gonna check those next. Okay, so what we've done here this time, we changed the methodology a bit. There's still a thermocouple on the underside, and it's taped exactly opposite of this metal thermometer, just in case the metal thermometer is more sensitive on the very tip, which is not directly touching the mat. In case it's more sensitive here and it's detecting the hot air temperature rather than the mat temperature, we've stuck another thermocouple to the mat on the top, and this is reading at the point of the thermocouple. So we should get a more accurate reading. And then the underside is going to be our best bet of what the true mat temperature is because it's not being hit by the air. So that's the number we're going to want to pay the most attention to for this one, I think. Just because that'll give us a conservatively low thermal tolerance number, which I would rather rate it conservatively low and be pleasantly surprised. So what we care most about, I've just switched. So that's this top number here, 27.6 currently. And then the bottom one is going to be the thermometer. So that's the thermometer, that's the underside. Let's see how it does. And then this thermocouple is over here on T2, currently 28.5 for that. And in case you're wondering, this number up here normally is our ambient readout, except it's going to be influenced by the heat. It's behind the thermocouple readers, so that's not really the most useful number other than roughly room ambient before the heat starts getting to it. The air hitting the mat right now, 137 degrees. That's the air temperature hitting it. 75 for the underside, 124 for the top thermocouple. Again, getting influenced by air, especially with liftoff at this point. So we can't disregard this number at this point. It's no longer touching the mat completely. It's now getting underdraft from the air. So that number is no longer good for us unless I retape it down. So let's just disconnect that to reduce confusion. Okay, air temperature, currently 140-ish degrees. 140, 145 is our range for air temperature Celsius. Underside is 88 for sure. So the mat for sure is at least 88 degrees plus or minus 2. Which is actually, we'll see if there's any damage at this point. It smells kind of like a match. So it definitely smells, I mean, yeah, there you go. There's some paint damage right there. Ow, that is very, very, very hot. What's our surface temperature right now? Surface temperature is like 100 degrees. Holy crap. So reading 86 on the surface right now. This is, by the way, after turning it off and letting it sit, obviously, for a good 30 seconds. So it cooled down a lot. This time it's straight down touching the mat. So known temperature in the 80s. So in the 80s Celsius for the mat, we're getting paint damage, which I have to say is pretty damn good. It's not even that bad. It's not like it didn't delaminate, but it is coming off. So yeah, not so bad really. I'm pretty happy with that result. If you're pointing a heat gun straight down for like several minutes, there's like 5 total, but it was 2 at that temperature, but 5 or so total. At a heavily painted area, then at about, I don't know, 90 degrees surface temperature, maybe 150 degrees air temperature Celsius for all these, underside temperature 80, we're getting some paint damage. And it still looks pretty damn good, considering what it just went through. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that result. Cool. So yeah, the mat looks great. There's no melting or anything like that down here. Certainly warm still, but there's no visible damage on the underside. No visible damage to the rubber on the top side. Obviously some paint damage. So let's just one more time go over the numbers here. We're roughly 90 degrees Celsius surface temperature. I'm being conservatively low there. So that's our rough temperature based on a measurement like 20 seconds after the gun was turned off, 20, 30 seconds. And then the underside was in the 80s, and then the air temperature was about 150 degrees Celsius. So this was at 143 degrees air temperature, 88 degrees mat temperature. We have some paint damage here, which is to be expected as it's ultimately ink, which is comprised largely of things like water. But the matte rubber material looks perfectly fine. We're not seeing meaningful material damage. Overall, we're really happy with this result. There aren't a lot of people who would be blasting the mat again from 2 inches away with the heat gun, dead on a painted part at nearly 150 degrees Celsius for the air temperature as it hits the mat. That's a bit excessive. It looks like it's pretty good for this. For soldering again, yeah, if you're going to make contact with the surface, it's not a soldering mat. That would cost us a lot more money to make and still print on. And if you want printed graphics on it, it's going to be kind of hard to pull off with a soldering mat anyway because ink melts or at least evaporates or dries up or something. So let's see how we do with a higher temperature. We stopped at 380 degrees Fahrenheit last time. I'm going to do this a little more ad hoc, just take spot measurements with the metal thermometer. 440 Fahrenheit. So the gun is set to 226 Celsius right now. And let's pick a spot that I can easily replicate that hasn't been messed with already. So we're going to point right here at this blower fan in the design, the GN logo design. Is at about the same 2-inch distance or so. We're at 170 something degrees and climbing air temperature. So 180. We're at 181 and 182 degrees Celsius, somewhere in that range. And surface is let's see what the surface is right now. Just kind of leave it alone for a second. We're doing just fine, and that was at 440 degrees Fahrenheit coming out of the heat gun, which is again 226 degrees Celsius. Let's bring it up to 500 Fahrenheit, which is 260. Actually, let's go a little higher than that. 520 degrees. Nah. Okay, it's been about 2.5 minutes. One thing to note here, when the mat is coming up like this, it's either partly because air is getting through the pores of the mat and underneath it causing liftoff, or because the rubber is expanding as it's heating up. And currently we're still climbing to steady state in the 70s currently. Obviously it's cooling down while we're doing this, so. Okay, let's check the underside if possible. It's like probably, it's about 80 degrees down there. All right, that's about 2.5 minutes again. None of the ink is coming off, and the rubber seems fine. Oh, is it steaming? Or is that the gun? It's steaming for sure. Yeah, the mat is... There's steam coming off the mat right now. It's definitely super hot. I mean, it's steaming, so... It's going to be up there. Okay, it's roughly 80 currently, and that's after being off for a while. All right, soldering iron test. What we're going to do, turn it on. We'll test the temperature of the tip of the soldering iron, and then apply it for a known period of time to the surface. We'll start with an unpainted area and then go to painted. There's some... Oh, shit. Is that a breaker or what? Oh, it's a short. See if it does it again, I guess. Site wiring fault. Let's see if that's what lights up. Damn, that is cool. So I think the soldering iron I want to use might have a short or something. Because when I turn it on, it trips the... let's show that one time. So when I turn this soldering iron on, you're going to see it'll flip our protective circuit in the APC power strip. So protection working, keep an eye on this. And 1, 2, 3. Pretty cool. So I found another one. It is not controllable in any way, but it's ancient. It's been around forever. So we're gonna see what temperature this gets up to. Right now we're reading 121 degrees, 124 degrees, 26, 28. Still climbing. The thermometer is catching up with it right now. So we're at 148, 149, 150. This is going to be really hot. I don't think I have a way to control it. See how it does on an unpainted surface first. Surface is at a lot of degrees Celsius. Current temperature, very high C. 168, 171, 75, 178, 181. Oh my God, 188. Yeah, that's causing some burning. So... this is what you can expect if you get a soldering iron up to, say, I don't know exactly what temperature this started. You can expect damage like this. Is this still hot to the touch? Yes, I should not touch it presently. This is an iron that's 200 degrees. And obviously that's going to cause all kinds of problems because we're melting rubber. I mean, it's 200 degrees. I don't really know what else you would expect. But if you were to lay it down maybe for like 3 seconds, it'd be okay. Leave maybe a bit of a scorch, but it's when you do anything longer than that. So basically, if you're trying to find a surface, yeah, you can stab it with the iron. Like if you're just working and you kind of slip and go like that, sure, it'll cause a bit of a scorch, but it's not going to like burn through the rubber instantly. That'll take a while. It's just we still don't recommend it as a perfect surface for soldering. You could solder on top of it. It's just, if you stab it, especially for long periods of time at 200 degrees Celsius, expect a bit of damage. That said, the mat's holding up really well despite not being built for this purpose of soldering. The mat will still protect the underlying surface, but it will get a scorch whenever you make a contact point with a really, really hot iron. So we don't recommend using the mat as a soldering mat specifically if you want it to be perfect for multi-hundreds of degrees irons and remain without any damage. Basically, if you want it to be a pristine surface with the ink unharmed, then soldering is going to be a bit of a problem for ink. Obviously, we're not afraid to say that it's not a soldering mat. However, we're interested in making one in the future, so keep that in mind. If you do want a specific soldering grade mat, this is just more of a building surface. That said, it holds up really well overall. So although we don't advertise the mat as a soldering mat, you can use it during soldering. You certainly could if not stabbing it for long periods of time or wiping the iron on the mat intentionally to clean it off or something. Surface temperature seems best kept below 80 degrees Celsius. Our official spec for safety of the mat is still 60 degrees Celsius, but we've tested up to and beyond 80 degrees here today and have observed minimal damage at those temperatures, especially if you're talking heat gun versus soldering iron. And if you still really want a soldering mat again, and this isn't good enough, although it's quite good if you are okay with it taking a couple scorch marks when you're at 200 degrees, it's still holding up pretty well. It's just not meant for it. But anyway, if you still really want a soldering mat, we're looking into them. And if you have specific ideas, tweet them at us or something like that, and we'll see what we can do. The takeaway is that if you're using a soldering iron that's multiple hundreds of degrees Celsius, it's gonna be a little bit hot for rubber and ink. So we're not a soldering mat. I'm perfectly okay saying if you're gonna be using this thing for soldering and you're gonna be laying down the soldering iron on the mat, it's not the best fit because we're not trying to be everything for everyone. We're trying to do one thing really well, which is be an awesome mod mat anti-static build surface with some diagrams on it. But from the perspective of a water cooling enthusiast, it works pretty damn well. But the ink hasn't run off and the rubber hasn't melted. So there might be some discoloration if you're at 300 degrees Celsius with the air temperature. The temperature of the mat is obviously different. It takes a while to heat up. Thermal resistance is a factor. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be pointing a heat gun 2 inches away from the mat for like 10 minutes at really high temperatures like that. So I'm really happy with how it held up because our spec previously was to keep the mat below 60 degrees Celsius, and so that's kind of what our rough guideline was. It can handle a bit more than that, and in terms of air temperature, can handle quite a lot as long as you're not pointed at it for a really long period of time, basically for long enough for the mat to start heating up to say 90 degrees. So it held up really well. If you're still interested in it and you want it, well, we can say now that a heat gun shouldn't be a problem. Excellent fit for water cooling enthusiasts, for PC building, and also for soldering if you're using either lower temperatures or you don't actually like stab the surface and hold it there for several seconds like I was doing, and you can socket the soldering iron somewhere, then it'd be fine for that too. It'll just eventually, you'll cause some damage if you sit there and hold it on it for several seconds at multiple hundreds of degrees, like 200 C plus, but that's to be expected. I mean, it's not an impervious material. So, lots of fun though. Thanks for watching. If you want to buy one, go to store.gamersnexus.net. We are shipping the current round in a couple of days here. So get your orders in. Thanks for watching as always. Subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.